Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings for tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we are speaking with Jonas Benggston, who is the founder of Edge Environment and CEO, and the president at Australian Lifecycle Assessment Society. So the lifecycle assessment is a technique to assess environmental impacts associated with the stages of a product's life. So this might be from the raw material extraction, also known as the cradle, or to disposal at the very end of the building's life, the grave. So Jonas was a very early adopter of the lifecycle analysis tool, and he's seen it develop into the critical component of environmental sustainable design that it is today. So this was a great conversation. There's no bigger expert, I think, in the field of lifecycle analysis than Jonas and his team at Edge. So what we talk about is how the LCA tool has developed over time, opportunities and challenges of using the tool today, and why there's an increase in focus on the embodied emissions as buildings become more operationally efficient, as we move toward more renewable energy grids and better designs of our buildings. So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Without any further ado, here is Jonas Benggston.
So I'm originally from Sweden, where I've trained in physics and psychology back there, and then started working in the automotive industry as a systems engineer for a couple of years, and felt like that drifted away a bit from my course in life, which is more around sustainability. So went to Australia, did a Master of Environmental Management, and planning to leave and go back to Europe or South America afterwards, but Australia is a difficult country to leave, so ended up staying, and with a few colleagues started a company called Edge Environment, which is a sustainability consultancy focusing on life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment, amongst other things. And that's been growing and growing, so now we're a team of about 25, split between Australia and Chile, and a good team focused on sustainability.
Yeah, phenomenal. So when did you see this life cycle analysis tool starting to develop, and how has it kind of progressed to where it is today?
Yeah, when I first got involved with it was probably at university back in mid-90s, and then it came across as a quite impractical, time-consuming, early kind of emerging tool. And the next time I got involved with it was mid-2000. When I started working with Edge Environment, and seeing the development there was quite fantastic, because you can see it being adopted already, started to be adopted in industry. You can see it being built into green rating tools. There were labels coming out, basically converting science into communication. But it was still early days. It's really in the last 10 years that it's mushroomed into a significant movement. Now you can see it everywhere, into government policy, procurement practices, rating tools. It's almost making its way into regulation as well. And the building sector is leading the charge, I would say. That's where life cycle assessment is most applied and most developed.
Yeah. So do you think it's one of the most effective ways, I guess, to drive sustainability initiatives in, say, the context of buildings?
Not to get hung up on the most effective way there, because it's certainly most comprehensive way to drive sustainability. It really captures most of the issues. The challenge is to get it into early decision making, where you make the most difference. How you can get the insights and the direction based on relatively limited information. If you're able to do that and apply the concept and the tool there, then it is definitely the most effective way.
So if we can maybe just do it for the people who aren't aware of the life cycle analysis as a tool, just a brief, I guess, really basic overview of actually what it is and how it works, and maybe talk about the journey of, say, a product from or something from the product stage and right through to the gate, or cradle to the gate. Yeah,
sure. So life cycle assessment is often called cradle to cradle or cradle to grave analysis, which is what defines it the most. It's taking a holistic scope in terms of not just looking at the operational efficiencies of a product or the recyclability at the end of life or recycled content, but it's weaving all that together into how does all the different product life cycle stages combine into environmental impact and consequence, and not just looking at carbon, but also looking at the broad range of other environmental impacts and resource consumption. So it's a holistic scope in both the cradle to grave and in environmental concerns.
And from that, you can get choose what's the highest percentage impact on say a building, and then from there you can make or choose the most effective sustainability initiatives that might have the highest leverage as opposed to just like the small ones. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it's really optimizing with the bigger picture in mind and identifying the trade-offs where you can maybe reduce carbon, but at the expense of using more water, for example, or more land. And it's balancing several issues and finding the optimal solution.
So what, at the moment, say if you got a building, what would the breakdown of impacts be roughly, do you think, compared to, say, embodied to energy and other kinds of impacts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so currently the rule of thumb, if you will, is if you look at the life cycle of a building, which typically stands, say, for at least 40, 50 years, most of the impact would be in running the building, so the operational energy. That's about somewhere between, say, 60 and 80, maybe 90% sometimes, if it's a really inefficient building. But the way it's developing is we focused a lot on operational energy in regulation and neighbors ratings and Green Star, and we're becoming more and more efficient, which makes the embodied component stand out more and more. So as we move towards zero energy and zero carbon buildings, it's all about the embodied impact. So that balance is shifting a bit.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Because I think right now there's a much higher focus on things like geopolymer cement and timber buildings and all these kind of things. These are going to be really relevant if we're going to zero emissions buildings.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. It's about every material sector really playing their part and having a zero carbon and low environmental impact pathway, not just the operation, but every component that goes into the building as well.
Yep. So for anyone listening now who's got, say, limited sustainability knowledge, what would be the lowest hanging fruit for a well-designed building for sustainability objectives?
Yeah, I think it's starting with the operational component. That is the low-hanging fruit, typically where you get most cost savings as well as environmental savings. Those are becoming harder and harder to achieve, where you're trying to shave off that small little remaining energy that's left in some of the efficient buildings. But then it's really going after the big ticket items that go into construction, and it starts with concrete, it starts with steel, both structural and reinforcing steel, going into timber, etc. So within each of those material categories, it's really different options on how to reduce. So if you take concrete, it's a lot about substituting out Portland cement with, for example, geopolymer concrete, sourcing low impact Portland cement if you have to. Steel, it's structured steel. The best gains there is actually not necessarily what you put into the building, but how much you can recover at the end of life. So the strategy depends on which building element you're looking at and which material, on how you optimize.
And for the operational efficiency, would you say better glazing, higher spec for the solar heat gain coefficient and thermal conductivity? Is that, say, one of the first things, that core things that needs to be had on every single building?
Yeah, I think all those getting the orientation right, getting the thermal envelope right, they're all well explored and well understood in the market. I think it's getting more into on-site renewables and green power for the buildings. But ultimately, if you look at Sydney buildings, for example, and Melbourne buildings, it's very much glass boxes, air conditioned. If you look at commercial buildings, and a lot of the savings are in behavioral components as well, to get the occupants to accept a different environment. maybe they don't need a semi-refrigerated, 19-degree working environment year round.
Are our buildings, someone asked me this the other day, are our buildings designed pretty well compared to that in Europe, or is our national construction code good enough, do you think?
I suppose almost anecdotally what you hear is that Australia tend to win a lot of awards and seen as excellent and leaders in commercial buildings. So we're really efficient there, and it's been driven a lot by neighbours' ratings coming and ABGR as it was originally coming in and making very visible what the energy performance is. But on the residential buildings, I think Australia is really falling behind Europe, where the construction practice is much more regulated and higher performance is required for sure.
So will life cycle analysis, as the tool develops, will it might be able to target the smaller buildings in residential, or is it at the moment already, as well as the bigger commercial type of buildings?
It should be eventually making its way into more applied to residential buildings as well and into the building code. I think the way it should be applied in a smart way is that you apply it potentially to big projects, but once you learn what's important, what the principles and key findings are from doing a life cycle assessment, you jump straight to those requirements. It's not like you have to conduct an LCA for every project, but you take the lessons learned and you apply them. Yeah. And I think one of those findings that we see now is, as I mentioned before, that materials and embodied impacts are becoming more and more important. And right now the construction code is not looking at sustainability of materials. So I think that's a finding from LCA that if you really want to tackle environmental and energy concerns, you have to go after the embodied impact as well.
Sounds like there's a huge opportunity for structural engineers if they're listening, because a lot of the embodied energy does lie upon the competency of the structural engineer with these alternative kind of methods, or replacing cement with supplementary cementitious materials and all these kind of things.
Absolutely. And having worked with some structural engineers, I think their role can play in different areas, both in the design and the specification of the buildings, influencing which materials are sourced, but also how it interacts, knowing that what the structural envelope and structural components can do to save operational impacts, whether it's more durable, more recoverable, saving energy, to interact with other teams as well. It's I think lifecycle assessment is a good tool that brings project teams together to work with a common framework, with a common language on the same issues.
So when you say durable and more recoverable, is that are you talking about the design life of the building, or can you just, I guess, touch on what you mean by that?
Yeah, it could be the design life of the building. I'm thinking primarily about some really good examples where steel structures have been able to be reused after the use, and where they discover that the structure steel that was put in the 60s and 70s is clearly marked who made it, what's the grade, and those engineers really thought it through, and now 40, 50 years later it's very easy to reuse them because we know the grade and the integrity of it. We don't have to remelt it and spend a lot of energy to make new steel.
Yeah, nice. So what are some of the challenges with the tool at the moment using it?
One of the challenges to get in early in the decision-making process, to be able to work on preliminary data, where LCA was originally set up to be quite detailed. So it's making it quicker and quicker. That's one of the challenges. Yep. The other challenge that we see now is that companies and decision makers want more and more specific information as well about, I understand what I should do about concrete and steel and timber and plastic, but how can I differentiate between specific suppliers and find the life cycle story of them? And that's a challenge mostly for the supply chain on how they present that information and their LCAs in a consistent format.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think because if you get in early, you can drive really, real design changes. But if you get in late, then you're just doing, it seems like might be a pointless exercise.
Yeah, that's right, and probably more something you can carry over to the next project rather than influence the one that you're working on.
Yeah, cool. So how accurate is it, and do you need to get, say, the building the bill of quantities every time you do this, or is there a more simpler and faster way as well?
There is a really fast way to apply life cycle assessment, life cycle thinking on buildings. If you've done a number of them before, you can use a lot of proxy values, and you can do that with reasonably accuracy. But it's really about what question you're trying to answer. If it's not always about optimizing design. Sometimes it is about benchmarking at the end of the building to really understand whether, for example, a timber building is better than a concrete building. It's going to be put under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of review, and then you have to be very detailed. But you don't have to go to that level of detail if you just want to get the 80-20 rule right up front. So it's really about what question you're trying to answer, I think.
Cool. And with benchmarking, is there enough data there at the moment to be able to measure? Is there like a typical for every office type of building to compare at the moment? Because it's something I always wonder, what structural system is actually the most efficient and most sustainable? Because I was trying to look on Google the other day and I couldn't find anything.
Yeah, it's a fair point. There's limited benchmark information available, and that's not just in Australia, it's internationally as well. There are a few exciting initiatives underway, primarily in the US, where they're building up a big benchmark database, mostly focused on embodied carbon, to establish exactly what we're after, how the different building types compare and what the benchmark is.
Yeah, nice. So in the future, do you envisage this tool becoming a crucial part of every project?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. If not applied directly, the thinking behind it, the lessons learned, should be applied on every project. So everyone should think from a life cycle perspective. And by that I mean stop thinking about issues in isolation. So stop thinking about we need to optimize recycled content in all materials, but look at where does this make sense to do, taking into account the full life cycle of products, transport distances, energy to reprocess materials, etc.
Yeah.
That thinking should always apply. Doesn't mean you do an LCA on every project, but the philosophy should be there.
And do you think there's ever if there's a price on carbon, and Australia went for it about, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or something, if there's a price on carbon, is this the only way and the best way to measure carbon impacts?
I think the price on carbon is driving more accuracy as well as it's driving action. I think looking internationally, it has decoupled economic growth from emissions in a lot of countries. You can see it in many European countries where it's been very effective. I think, not to get political, but I think it was potentially a mistake to retract the price once you have it in there, because I thought the evidence was that we're starting to see an effect both in utility sector and by flow on effects in material sector as well. So I think it's an effective tool for sure.
Yeah. Hopefully we bring it out again. I think it might be quite important. Just as we wrap it up now, what do you think will have the biggest impact on the buildings industry going forward? And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to this conversation.
I think the biggest impact, what the talk is about now, that influences the building market is actually the carbon agenda. If we look at this in sustainability, I think the Paris Agreement, the commitment to zero carbon by mid-century or mid-ish parts of the century, is driving a lot of change. It's driving away from a reliance on government policy to companies and organizations working out what their pathway is and what their role is to get to a zero carbon economy, both as a property investor, construction companies, material suppliers. I think that's where the biggest and fastest change is happening.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It seems like an inevitable trend, whether we have to go that direction out of choice or necessity. It's almost inevitable that either way, it's going to trend in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. It's the momentum is starting to pick up for sure, and as you say, it is almost inevitable.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Jonas. That was awesome. If people want to find out more about you and some of your projects at Edge, and we didn't really touch on Alcaz, but maybe you can give Alcaz a plug as well.
Yeah, for sure. So Edge Environment is, you find it easy on Google, just Edge Environment, and you'll find out what we do. And we work a lot with the Australian Life Cycle Assessment Society, ALCAS, and I'm currently the president of the organization. And that's a crucial body that provides the tools and resources for progress in industry. We have a practitioner certification scheme. We have a life cycle database of products and services for Australia. We have best practice guidelines, seminars, conferences, training. So Australian Life Cycle Assessment Society is doing a lot of the work that's positioning LCA in Australia as a practical tool.
Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, just one quick request. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review. It helps our rating and ranking on iTunes, so more people can hear from the people who are making our cities better places for our future.